Hello everybody and welcome to another special edition of Merlin Reviews, and I'm going to be talking about the recent 2014 remake of the classic 1987 action/sci-fi film, which is one of my favorite films of all time, RoboCop. And honestly, I don't know where to begin. I saw this for the opening release. I believe it was 10/40. Saw it with a couple friends of mine. I dragged them along because I felt that I was going to need some buddies to come along and help me share the pain, because I didn't think that I was really able to watch this by myself. And to be honest, I think I probably would have walked out of the theater. So kind of giving you some early spoilers as to how I felt about the movie. But I do want to try and be fair, which is why I kind of waited a couple hours to let this sink in and just sort of do some other stuff and do a little thinking about it. And unfortunately, it's one of those things where you can tell the movie's quality is really lacking something when you're already starting to forget it a couple hours after you saw it. Like, that's kind of the worst crime I think a film could commit, is to not be memorable at all. Like, even if a film does fail or do something really bad, it really misses the mark, if it does so in a way that's at least memorable or entertaining or laughable, you can get something out of it. And I don't know. Let's just dive a little further into this. Basically, it has the same general premise as the original RoboCop film. It takes place in the near future, and instead of OCP, this evil corporation, basically taking control of one city and trying to own the police force and slowly move into their robotics and use them on the streets and just kind of utilize that as a way to just get as much money out as they possibly can out of it, and it's just completely overrun by greed. It's kind of similar, but with a very different goal. In this world, it's basically, they've already spread around the world, kind of like they mentioned in the original film, where they've basically used all their machines to subvert and basically police the entire world. And it seems like the United States kind of honestly rules the rest of the world. So it's sort of I guess kind of a commentary on how some people might view the United States now as a police force, but now completely like domineering and tyrannical to like a completely different level. So I guess that's kind of one of the main messages of the film. I'm not really sure. I thought some of it was trying to be satirical, but it just came off as being possibly offensive. I don't know, just some of the little choices they made. Like, it takes place, they do a demonstration, I believe it's in Iraq or somewhere in the Middle East, I don't know if it's specified, and we just see these people, they're really upset about the incredible like American presence. They've got all these freaking machines just patrolling the streets, and it's kind of scary basically. And these couple guys kind of rationalize everything by saying, oh yeah, let's just go out and prove that these things are dangerous and that America's evil by going out and blowing up things and basically making it seem like they're completely justified in them being there. So it seemed kind of offensive, almost implying that all Middle Eastern people are basically only able to resort to terrorism as a means of changing things. I don't know, it was just right off the bat, I thought that was a bit odd. And for some reason, in the advertising, Samuel Jackson, I guess, was implied to be one of the main antagonists of the film or something. And he was just like a big part of it. And even though he does show up a lot, he's not really integral to the film. It's kind of like the original film had a brief news segments about kind of all the ridiculous things that were going on in the world, which are just kind of exaggerations of politics and media of the time, as well as some funny commercials. Instead of little snippets to kind of just set the stage, these newscasts, which are exclusively Sam Jackson just kind of focusing on OCP's, like, focus on trying to pass this law to basically legalize the usage of these robot patrols in the United States. And for some reason, I guess he's incredibly biased. Maybe it's making fun of Fox News, but it just made me think, wow, this guy has a lot of power of influence, and why does he really care? And we kind of joked about it, like, they just kept using this footage over and over again. He kept having these big segments that were huge parts of the movie, and really, it just got kind of annoying. We said, we really, really never thought we'd say this, but it was kind of annoying, and we kind of dreaded the moments we see Samuel Jackson in a movie. I mean, how rare is it that you don't look forward to seeing scenes with Samuel Jackson? I mean, that's kind of a bad sign. That was really overused. And that's kind of one of the big problems with the movie, is that there are really, really huge sections where not much is really happening. There are literally entire shots that are supposed to be meaningful with characters interacting where the characters aren't really being developed. They're just kind of saying things or even standing there doing nothing, and they really don't establish the characters very well. But let's get into the plot. Basically, after laying that groundwork, it's kind of the same general idea as the first film, in which Alex Murphy is this cop who's just, I guess he's new to the police force. It seems like he's pretty well established there. Unlike Alex Murphy, who kind of just recently arrived, he wasn't really familiar with things. And Detroit was like this really dystopian wasteland of crime and corruption in the 80s film. This one, it just seems kind of like a normal city. It doesn't really seem quite as futuristic besides the robots. There is some technology, but it doesn't really come off as being that impressive. And he's trying to investigate this weapons deal with some evil crime lord. I believe his name was Valen, who's sort of the substitute, and a very, very poor substitute for Clarence Boddicker in the movie. I know I'm going to bounce around here, but I just want to get this out because honestly, if I try to put too much time and effort and energy into this, I feel like I'm already doing too much as it is. I don't think this film is really worth it. So basically, Clarence Boddicker was an amazing villain. And, you know, we knew so much about him even from a couple key scenes. And he was an integral part of the movie. He was actually in cahoots, sorry if you haven't seen it, but he was in cahoots with the evil corporation, Dick Jones, you know, and it was like this whole combination of corporate greed included with organized crime coming together to take over the city. It just showed that crime and corruption was rampant everywhere. In this one, he's like a minor throwaway, boring villain with no development, not even really much of a personality. That was kind of sad. And in the original film, Alex Murphy stumbles upon the crime boss and his gang, and he gets blown to pieces. He gets completely mutilated in one of the most gruesome ways possible, and he's basically dead. And they resuscitate him by taking what little bit they can of his brain, few body parts, put him into a mechanical suit. This new one, they use one of the dumbest devices ever. Because he's investigating, they decide, hey, this guy's kind of a threat, let's get rid of him. So he's well established as being a problem for these people. And it turns out that instead of the cops being incompetent like they were in the original films, they're just corrupt here. And basically they're all in league, and they decide to kill Alex Murphy by strapping a car bomb to his vehicle. But instead of it being activated like a car bomb normally would be, once you get in and it goes off and kills the guy, you know, fairly efficient, I suppose that's how car bombs are supposed to be. In this one, after his partner gets shot, which is when they put the bomb on, he goes home, spends a little time with his family, in also really underdeveloped, awkward scenes. It sets off the car alarm, making him go out to the car, making it the most delayed car bomb ever, and kind of inefficient because it goes off when he opens the door, but that's a lot less likely to kill somebody than if they're actually inside it. Now, it could seriously damage them, maybe kill them, but you'd think they just want to use a traditional car bomb where you get inside it and it blows up. You know? Most overly complicated, dumb car bomb, and just the criminals and the villains were just mostly stupid in this movie. Oh God. This is going to go on for a while, I can feel it. This could be a long video. Damn it. But I have to pay for this, I guess. I dragged my friends into this, so I gotta get as much out of this as possible. Anyway, OCP is looking for a product that will basically allow them to pass the law and say, well, how do we get people to agree with putting these robots on the street in the United States, which is odd. I mean, of all the places, everywhere in the world seems to be controlled by the U.S., but in the U.S., it's a problem, you know. So basically, the United States people don't care about human rights only when it applies to them. You know, making Americans overall to be kind of shallow and just horrible. Yeah. So they decide, hey, kind of like in the first film, let's give it something more marketable, a face. Let's put a guy in the suit, make it seem like, you know, one of the big problems that a senator has, who is really the advocate for trying to not pass this law, says, well, you know, without a human being with compassion, you know, it's kind of uncomfortable letting all that power in the hands of robots. So they decide, hey, let's just get a cop with a clear conscience, try to give him all the abilities of a robot, and there you have RoboCop. They pick Alex Murphy. But it's handled in a very, very different way for the most part. Basically, in the first film, they try to erase his mind completely, but it turns out they can't completely, and over time his memories slowly come back, primarily driven by the murder, which kind of brings back Alex Murphy's drive and his personality, kind of fused together with the robotic components to form, the hero that we eventually know as RoboCop. And the whole film was basically about trying to find his humanity, try and find his identity again, while kind of taking on the people and sort of getting revenge and bringing back justice to the city. It's kind of a cool revenge tale / introspective look at what makes a person human and just kind of recovering that overall humanity, which is one of the reasons why I think RoboCop is a classic, because it balances some witty humor and action and satirical nature with, honestly, a really good narrative and some decent acting. It's mostly over the top, but they do give memorable performances, and I do think Peter Weller was a great RoboCop. We'll get to Joel Kinnaman, I believe his name is, in a minute. But they decide... I don't even know. I feel like Gary Oldman, who played the scientist in this film for developing the RoboCop program, I don't really know if we were supposed to root for him or hate him. I think by the end of the movie it's established he's an alright guy, but some of the things he does in the film are just really questionable. Like there's a scene where he says, okay, we have to try and make Alex accept the fact that he's no longer has a body, which is really stupid because he just goes up. The way they shot this didn't make any sense. He goes up to the explosion, he gets knocked back. They say he has these severe burns over 80% of his body, and that translates to him losing everything. Like, all that's left of this guy are his lungs, some of his spine, some of his brain, not even all his brain, his face, which is completely unharmed, and his hand. Everything else was completely vaporized, apparently. It was unrecoverable, which I thought was incredibly unbelievable. We thought that was really stupid. Why did he have a hand? It looks wrong. But the doctor puts him in front of a mirror, I guess to try and coax him into accepting his new fate, and deconstructs every little piece of his mechanical body and shows all that's left. And you just have the guy's face, his brain, some spine, and lungs. And he's looking at himself in the mirror. Like, how traumatic and terrifying is that? It just didn't make any sense for this well-trained doctor who's supposed to know so much about the human psyche. It was really weird. There's some disturbing, mean, confused elements in this movie. Like, I didn't know who we were supposed to root for or why, or clearly even what the message was. I think there were some good ideas they were going for, but I don't know if it was executed well at all. It was really a mess. Really a frustrating mess. And anyway, after trying to overcome this, he does learn to eventually train his components and become RoboCop, and he goes out and tries to get revenge, and he's driven by the same things as he was in the first movie, but he doesn't really lose his personality and have to get it back. He kind of always has it, but the boss of the company, who's played by Michael Keaton, who is one of the few good things about the movie, wants to basically find a way to override it. So Gary Oldman finds a way to make Alex Murphy think he has free will, but it's really just the computer controlling things when he's fighting criminals. So he has to kind of override the system, even though it isn't really as dramatic because we don't really see that shift from machine to man. And by the time he becomes RoboCop, and it's semi-watchable, I'm not saying good or entertaining, but when he kind of comes into the role a little bit, he doesn't really seem quite like RoboCop. Peter Weller was able to kind of give the character humanity while still seeming kind of like a robot. It's kind of impressive. Joel Kinnaman, I don't want to hate this guy. I don't know much about him. I thought he did okay, I guess. Honestly, I thought through most of the movie, the beginning, I thought his acting was honestly bad. His acting, his overall performance was just kind of crappy. But as the movie progressed and he was allowed to kind of get into the actual RoboCop role, he did improve somewhat. I don't think he was very good, but I think that's because the director really wasn't able to get good performances out of the actors. Like, seriously, most of these people were not giving good line reads. I mean, there were some established actors here. Sam Jackson was doing okay, of course, Michael Keaton was doing pretty good. Gary Oldman was doing okay. But there were a lot of other people in this film that weren't doing very good. I don't know his name, but the actor that played Rorschach in The Watchmen, and also I believe it was the new Freddy from the recent Nightmare on Elm Street remake, he was in it. He was one of the more interesting characters. He was kind of a bad guy, but he was one of the few believable characters in the movie. Anyway, there's a whole subplot, well, I guess it's a main plot, I don't really know, of one of the issues is Alex Murphy, in becoming RoboCop, is unable to really connect with his family because they're overriding the system and taking away his emotions because somehow the technology can't function when there's heavy emotion involved. Not sure why. This is taking a lot out of me, guys. But yeah, there was this whole underdeveloped plot about how he's losing his connection to his family, and they make it like this big crux of the movie, and you just don't care because they don't spend any time really establishing these characters. It doesn't even really feel like it's RoboCop's movie until like maybe the last half hour, and by then it's mostly action, which was kind of crappily done action scenes. There's a lot of shaky cam, just really fast-paced editing. The effects were mostly just messy, and I don't know. It was really, really rough. Got some coffee. I got to get through this. But I think the biggest problem with this movie, there are a lot of problems, but the biggest problem with this movie is that it's trying to be smart, but it doesn't really take a lot of time to actually express its thoughts. It wants to move along with this plot, but spends a lot of time just focusing on side elements that don't really seem that important to the central story. The main character is RoboCop, and it feels like don't really focus on him that much. It's more about what the corporation's doing, what the cops are doing, what the drug dealers are doing, and none of it's developed enough that we can really invest in any of it. Really. And the acting is just kind of flat. There are just these long scenes, like I said, of nothing really going on. It was honestly a boring movie. And for an action film, one that was supposed to be the thinking man's action film, as it was advertised, there just wasn't much intriguing going on here. Oh, man. Let's see, what else was there? There were a couple callbacks to the previous film. One guy says, I wouldn't buy that for $1, kind of haphazardly. But that was like the only real throwaway, and that was kind of just cheaply done in there. It wasn't integrated in a very good way. And they were kind of obnoxious. Like, they start off the movie with the old RoboCop soundtrack, his opening theme, dun 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 dun, but they do this kind of weird techno underlay with it, right as he's walking through the office, like guys, that's not really used until he actually transforms into RoboCop. So it seemed really on the nose and kind of in your face, like, okay, we have to put a couple little references in here to make other people feel happy, but really it just feels kind of insulting. That's another problem too. I do feel like there was a message, there was some effort in here, but it was just all so quickly thrown together. There were just a lot of ideas that never really came together in unison, and I think this movie is trying to be darker, I guess, but it doesn't really feel that dark because, once again, nothing's really well developed. And it misses out on, I think, the thing that made the original films, at least the original two, and to some extent the third one, special, is that there is this sense of fun. I think the satirical elements were almost completely lost. The strong, centralized story and the well-developed character elements were gone. Honestly, the acting was really, I think, better in the original film. Yes, over the top, but at least they were memorable performances. I mean, this movie brought nothing new to the table. I mean, it was trying to be a different story, but if it was going to be a different kind of RoboCop, they could at least try and make it kind of like a RoboCop movie. Just more consistent action, developed thoughts, strong atmosphere, just really, the cinematography was really messy in this movie too. The movie was just a clumsy mess. Oh man, and God, his suit didn't look very good at all. I mean, it's just amazing to me how 80s effects, and these are practical effects too. The 87 outfit armor looked better. And they even knew that painting him black wasn't good because they changed it later on in the movie. Because it looked terrible. It looked terrible. Ed 209's in the movie, and apparently he sucks. Like RoboCop takes down like 5 of him. They establish that 50 caliber rounds could take down RoboCop, which means that this RoboCop is apparently, honestly, kind of crappy compared to the original, who could take on like freaking tank shells practically and still survive. And they kind of contradict that because then he takes on like a whole bunch of crooks, gets pounded by like thousands of rounds, and he comes out semi-okay, so that really wasn't well established. Yeah, they just kind of contradicted lots of little elements in their own movie, just little things that didn't add up. And, I know I've said this before, but I think besides the couple main actors that they got to be bankable, the big ones being Samuel L. Jackson, Gary Oldman, and Michael Keaton, most of the actors in this movie were bad. They were just obviously reading their lines like practically off the post, like on the screen. Most of these people weren't giving good performances. They really weren't. There were just so many flat performances. The director didn't know how to get a good, powerful story out of his characters, and the actors didn't know what to do. This movie had no soul. It had no sense of fun, no sense of real direction as to what it wanted to be. It didn't take any risks like the original film did. It just didn't really have a collected, solid story of any kind. I mean, if this movie was different than RoboCop, but it managed to stay true to the general idea of the character and kept it relatively congruent, I think it would have been okay. Maybe not great, but I was thinking this movie was honestly going to mess up a lot of things about the character, but still kind of be an average movie. And I personally found it to be very, very flawed in a lot of other ways. So I really, really hated it. But for the sense of fairness, I'm going to say a couple things I did kind of like about the movie. I don't think that they're major, but there are a few little things they got right. Michael Keaton probably gives the best performance out of anybody in the movie. He actually seems like he's the best developed character. I think they spent more time on him than they did actually on RoboCop. He just has a lot of fun with the role. He plays a decent bad guy. And I actually think some of his arguments are compelling. He's actually kind of likable. Probably the most interesting character in the movie, which is bad because he's the villain. But, whatever. He did a decent job. Gary Oldman was kind of iffy, but he kind of came back, and I did think that his character was kind of going somewhere. But honestly, since most of the first hour, it felt like we were kind of supposed to hate him. I don't know, it was kind of imbalanced there. Samuel L. Jackson was great, but they really overused his segments. Like, I think that news segment came up 6 times. It seemed like it should have only come in maybe 3. So they could have cut back on some of those. Like, we get it. We get it. Fox News is evil. I just kept wondering, why does this guy care so much? Was he like in league with OCP? It's not really OCP, but they still call it that. I don't know why they just made OCP, but whatever. Why was he so invested? Was he getting paid off? Was he like in league with the company? No, he's just a dick who's kind of the centralized force of this movie, and he's doing a good job. But Samuel L. Jackson, just doing the Samuel L. Jackson stick, he'd do that in any movie. And the best part is kind of when he just loses it and starts cursing about it because he doesn't really get his way by the end of the movie. So, even Samuel L. Jackson is overused and gets tiring, which is a bad sign. But he still had some good scenes, I guess. There were a few okay shots in the movie, not many, but there were some cinematography elements I liked. I think Viola Davis wasn't doing a good job, but she kind of sort of started acting better later on in the film, I guess. There was a nice little twist there. Let's see. Oh, okay. Most of the first hour of this movie takes a lot of time spending on Alex becoming RoboCop and dealing with it. And it should have been interesting and intriguing and thought-provoking, but it was really boring. It just was really boring. The dialogue was flaccid. The actors didn't know what to do, as I said before, and it just dragged and dragged and dragged, and a lot of the scenes could have been taken out completely. They just weren't utilized properly. They really weren't. You didn't feel anything most of the time. I wasn't invested. I don't think the 2 gentlemen that were with me were invested. But basically, they could have cut most of that down and just focused on the main plot and helped the character grow, and they could have helped him deal with that another way, perhaps. I'm not sure. But basically, the first hour or so, easily more than half of the film is boring buildup. Really. He doesn't actually do RoboCop stuff until an hour and 6 minutes into the movie before he actually goes and tracks down criminals. Okay? An hour and 6 minutes in an under 2 hour movie. More than half of the movie before he actually becomes RoboCop. Okay? The original film did it so much better. Okay. But, this is the thing. When Joel Kinnaman actually becomes RoboCop and kind of gets a little bit of his attitude and starts coming into his own and actually taking down the criminals for his own personal reasons, wanting revenge, and then eventually taking down the corporation, finding out what they've been doing to him, messing with his mind and trying to take away his free will, and eventually try and kill him, RoboCop does kind of become RoboCop. A little bit. At least some semblance of the original film. A little more action, some actual drive to move the plot forward, a little bit of character growth, a little bit, and the actor does seem to improve and kind of come into the character. And if the whole movie had been more like that, a little more in sync with at least what it wanted to do, it might have been decent. The problem is, these scenes aren't that great. They're mostly rushed. The action's not really that great. It kind of makes RoboCop seem a lot less impressive than he was in the 80s, really. And the character still isn't very well developed, and the actor is only okay. And this happens more than halfway through the movie. And it kind of jumps around so much, you don't really know where it's going, but that's because, honestly, it's not that well written. It just isn't. There are, honestly, contradictions and plot holes and all kinds of issues with this film. But at least stuff starts happening in the hour 6 minute mark. The problem is, even in that point, there were still segments that were really boring. Still, there were snippets of good things. But another big piece of writing, I guess before I end this review, there's another thing that really stuck out to me, how dumb, just how the basic plot threads of this movie were, that obviously somebody didn't look over this script. Like, there were these little mistakes that just kept popping up that were so big. Like, for instance, when they're showing off RoboCop to the public for the first time, he's completely overtaken by the machinery because they decide to basically drive down his emotions so he's easier to control. And they put him out in the public, and he tracks down this criminal who's basically this wanted rapist and murderer who's been on the run for 6 years. But this is the kicker. He finds him and tracks him down and takes him down because this criminal, who's apparently severely dangerous and wanted, been on the run from the police for 6 years, is able to blend into a crowd surrounded by police officers with RoboCop there. Now, why would a career criminal who obviously didn't want to be caught, judging by his actions in the film, why would he go to the middle of a crowded area surrounded by police officers on the debut of a new super powerful robot policeman? Why? Why was he that dumb? It doesn't make any sense. He might be the world's dumbest criminal, and that, for me, was the moment that broke me. I mean, I thought the movie was bad, like, maybe about a half an hour in. I just kind of felt like it was dead on arrival. I tried to give it a chance, honestly, but it was just boring, confusing, and had very few snippets of good things. But that moment was just so epically stupid. I don't know. I don't know, guys. Well, apparently the film has gotten mixed reviews so far on Rotten Tomatoes. I think it's at about like 50%. I mean, I guess if you know nothing about RoboCop and you're just looking for a cheap action movie to fill your day, you're still not going to remember it. It's not really much of an impression. I doubt it. I really think that it's just not a good movie. I mean, maybe somebody could think it's mediocre, but really on a basic plot level and a thematic level and a character-driven level, it's just not well connected. It doesn't flow very well. It doesn't know what it wants to be. It doesn't take any chances. The acting's not good. The dialogue's not very good. The directing wasn't good. The editing wasn't good. The effects weren't even really that good. And really, there just wasn't much there. I will admit, it does sort of pick up towards the end, but really you have to wait almost an hour before anything really interesting happens. Honestly, even as a film, just with taking all the nostalgia aside, it's at best a generic action movie, and not even a very well done generic action movie. And, you know, that's really all I have to say about it. I can't say I was disappointed because I didn't think it would be good. but it was worse than I was expecting. I would not recommend you guys see this, especially if you like RoboCop. Unless you feel the way I feel, that you're a kind of a hardcore fan and you have to go out and see this movie just to kind of show your respect or just deal with it, take the pain because you love the character so much. I don't know how well this movie's going to do. I know here it didn't do very well because we got a big storm in the upper east coast of the U.S. And I know around here, my town, like, there was literally one other guy in the theater with my friends and myself. So there were 4 people total, 3 of whom got in, for free. So at least in, my town in PA, RoboCop's not making any money for its debut. And I don't think it's going to do very well. We'll see what happens. But I think the worst crime is that this movie's kind of forgettable. It doesn't leave an impression. It's not even so bad it's good. It's just kind of a blight on a character that I really liked. And it's a shame because I feel like somebody was trying, but it just wasn't put together very well. It felt very rushed, messy, and borderline insulting at times. And I'd probably give it maybe honestly, a 2 out of 10, 1 out of 5. I mean, it does have a few snippets of good acting and a few okay scenes here or there and some decent lines, but it comes nowhere near close to saving the movie. And if you guys watch Film Fanatics, my podcast group, I'm going to spoil this here. I'm going to give this movie an F. I don't think it's a passable film. I really don't. And I'm trying to take the anger out of this. I really am. I'm more disappointed and just, honestly, as you can tell, I'm kind of losing my energy because it was just draining talking about it. But final, yes, I give it an F grade. Very disappointing, very, very bad, very just terribly made film. Snippets of a few good things. If you really don't care, you feel like wasting your money with some friends, get a lot of popcorn and drink whatever you want or do whatever you got to go in to enjoy the movie. I don't know if that'll help, but it's a boring, poorly made, messy, uninspired film that does not come close to matching the original's campy glory. And that's my final thoughts on the 2014 RoboCop remake. On final note, if they decide to give it a sequel, if it makes enough money, fine. But just forget all the origin stuff because they didn't do that well. And just focus on the action. It might at least be mildly entertaining, I guess. But I doubt that's going to happen. Alright guys, well, if you have any thoughts on the film or this video or anything, please leave your comments in the comment section below. And yeah, subscribe to the Phantom Group, my new collab channel. Probably should make an official video for that. Film Fanatics Podcast, where I talk about movies with my buddies. My other little collab group, I guess you could say. And I'm going to have a new segment coming up in which I review, with a friend of mine, all the Godzilla movies in preparation for the 2014 remake. Alright guys, been a pleasure. Don't see RoboCop, please. Merlin out.